Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a topic that's maybe a little bit more personal, a little bit more intimate than some of our usual deep dives.
hmm
We're going to be talking about the impact of pornography on relationships. And we had a ton of requests from you all to cover this, so we knew we had to do a deep dive on this one. And, I think a lot of people might not even realize how pervasive pornography is in our society these days. We were looking at some research that suggests 46% of adult men and 16% of adult women are viewing pornography on a weekly basis.
Yeah, that's a pretty significant number, and I think it speaks to the fact that this is something that's become increasingly normalized in our culture.
Right.
And I think one of the things that we want to talk about today is that there's this kind of disconnect
Yeah.
between this normalization of pornography and the potential consequences that it can have on relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been digging into a ton of research on this. And, there's actually a lot of studies out there. We've got some here from Camilleri and colleagues in 2021, Fight the New Drug in 2023, Park and others in 2018. And they all kind of point to this idea that pornography can have these significant impacts on not just the individuals who are using it, but also on their families, their workplaces, even the wider community.
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand that this is not just an individual issue, right? It really can have ripple effects that go out and affect those around us.
And the people who are often most affected are the people who are closest to us, our intimate partners.
Absolutely. And I think that's where we really want to focus this deep dive today on the potential impacts on intimate partner relationships.
Exactly. So full disclosure for you listening, some of the research we've been looking at, studies like Grove et al. In 2011, Willoughby and Leonhardt in 2020, they do suggest that there can be some potential positive outcomes of pornography use, at least in certain contexts.
Yeah, it's not entirely black and white, right?
Yeah.
I mean, some of the studies have talked about the possibility of couples using pornography to explore new sexual behaviors together,
Huh.
or even to kind of spice things up and enhance their sexual intimacy. But I think it's really important to acknowledge that, that those potential benefits are not the whole story.
Right. There's a bigger picture here. And a lot of that has to do with kind of what we were talking about before, these potential negative consequences. We're seeing that consistently in research across multiple studies. Huntington et al. In 2021, Leonhardt et al. In 2019, Willoughby and colleagues from various years,
Mhm.
others. There's this kind of recurring theme that pornography can have a lot of negative impacts on intimate relationships. And so I think that's really where we want to kind of dive in today and explore, what does the research actually say about this? What are some of the specific ways in which pornography can affect our relationships?
Yeah, I think a good starting point is to really think about how pornography use can affect the individual,
Hmm.
right? Because those individual effects then naturally spill over into the relationship. So, for instance, um, one of the things that research has shown is that individuals who use pornography frequently, they can actually develop a real difficulty in becoming sexually aroused without it.
And that's kind of fascinating when you think about, how our brains work. It's almost like we can become conditioned, right?
Right.
Where the brain starts to associate sexual arousal with the specific stimuli that it's finding in pornography. And then it can become more difficult to experience that same level of arousal with a partner in a more intimate, non-pornographic setting.
And it makes sense, right? Because the type of stimuli that you're typically going to find at pornography is often very different from what you would experience in a real life intimate relationship. It tends to be more novel, more intense, more visually stimulating. And so the brain can kind of get used to that level of stimulation, and then anything less than that can feel less exciting or less arousing.
And that naturally can lead to a decrease in interest in sex with a partner, right?
Absolutely. If your sexual needs or desires are being primarily met through pornography, then it makes sense that you might not feel as motivated or interested in seeking out physical intimacy with your partner.
Right. And then you add to that the fact that, some of the research, it's not conclusive, but it does suggest that there might be a link between pornography consumption and an increased likelihood of things like hooking up or even infidelity.
Yeah, it's a complicated area, and I think it's important to be careful about drawing too many conclusions from the research. But I think what we can say is that pornography can contribute to distorted beliefs and perceptions about relationships and sexuality.
And that's really important to think about, right?
Yeah.
Because if we're constantly being exposed to these idealized and often unrealistic portrayals of sex and relationships, it can really mess with our expectations and our understanding of what real intimacy actually looks like.
Absolutely. And it's not just the unrealistic expectations, right? I mean,
Sure.
pornography often presents a very distorted view of sexuality. It's very performance-oriented. It's often focused on power and dominance, and it can lack the emotional depth and the vulnerability that are so important in healthy, intimate relationships.
Right. So, on top of all that, we've also got research that shows that individuals who use pornography can experience a lot of negative self feelings like guilt, shame, feelings of inadequacy. And then there's also the potential for pornography use to lead to neglecting other important areas of life, like hobbies, social connections, work responsibilities.
And all of those things, as you said, can really spill over into the relationship.
Absolutely. So I think we've kind of established, that pornography can have a significant impact on individuals. Now let's talk about some of the specific ways in which it can affect the relationship itself. So one of the most common complaints that we hear from partners of people who use pornography is that they feel sexually inadequate.
Yeah, that's a really common theme that comes up in therapy, partners feeling like they're being compared to the people in pornography and feeling like they just can't measure up.
It's like they're competing with this airbrushed, idealized image of perfection,
Right,
right?
right.
And it's not a fair competition. It can be really damaging to a partner's self-esteem and make them feel like they're not good enough.
And I think it's important to remember that, pornography is not real life.
Mm.
It's a fantasy world that's designed to be visually stimulating and arousing.
Yeah.
So it's really not a fair comparison to make.
Right. And then another issue that can come up is when a partner objects to certain sexual activities that the user might be interested in as a result of their pornography use.
Hmm.
And that can create a lot of tension in the relationship because it can feel like there's this disconnect between their sexual desires.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, when you have that kind of disconnect, it can be really difficult to find a compromise that works for both partners.
Yeah.
And that can lead to resentment, frustration, and a feeling of emotional distance.
And then, of course, we have to talk about the impact of pornography on trust in the relationship. It's a huge issue, right?
It is. And I think it makes sense, if you're hiding your pornography use from your partner or if you're being dishonest about it, it's going to erode trust.
Right. And it can be hard to rebuild that trust once it's been broken.
It takes time and it takes effort from both partners.
So when we look at all of these factors together, it's not surprising that research consistently shows that couples where one or both partners are struggling with pornography use, they tend to report lower overall relationship satisfaction.
Right. And not just lower satisfaction, but also lower stability.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the studies have found that couples who are dealing with pornography issues are more likely to break up.
And it's not just about the big things like satisfaction and stability. It can also affect the day-to-day dynamics of the relationship.
Absolutely. We see couples who are struggling with pornography use. They often have less positive communication. They're more likely to engage in conflict. And there's even some research that suggests a correlation with increased psychological aggression between partners.
And then, of course, there's the issue of children and the potential for them to be exposed to pornography.
That's a huge concern for a lot of parents, and it's something that can add a lot of stress and anxiety to the relationship.
Yeah, it's a tough one. So, I think we've painted a pretty bleak picture here, but I do want to emphasize that there is hope. It is possible to heal from the negative impacts of pornography and to build healthier, stronger relationships.
Absolutely. And I think the first step towards healing is really for the individual who's using pornography to acknowledge that it's a problem and to have a genuine desire to change.
And that's often easier said than done, right? I mean, if someone's been using pornography for a long time, or if they've developed a dependency on it, it can be really difficult to stop.
It's a process, and it takes a lot of hard work and commitment,
Yeah.
but it is possible. And, one of the things that can be helpful is for the individual to really understand how pornography is affecting them and their relationship.
Hmm.
And that often involves a lot of self-reflection.
Hmm.
And it can be helpful to have support from a therapist or a counselor.
Absolutely. And for partners, it's really important to create a safe space for open and honest conversation about the issue. And that can be tough, right? Because these conversations can be really emotionally charged.
Oh, yeah.
But it's so important to be able to talk about it without judgment and without interruption. And, maybe even agree to take breaks if the conversation starts to get too heated, come back to it later when you're both feeling a little bit calmer.
And, sometimes having a neutral third party there, like a therapist, can really help facilitate that conversation and keep it from becoming too explosive.
Right. So once the individual has kind of acknowledged that there's a problem and they've started to explore, how it's affecting them and their relationship, then it can be helpful to kind of shift the focus to what are their values? What are their goals? What kind of person do they want to be? What kind of relationship do they want to have?
Right, because ultimately that's what's going to motivate them to change, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about stopping a behavior, it's about becoming the person you want to be.
Exactly. And that involves facing any fears that they might have about what life would look like without pornography. And that can be scary, right? I mean, if you've been using pornography as a coping mechanism for a long time, it can be really daunting to think about giving it up. But it's important to remember that you're not alone in this. There are a lot of resources available to help you.
And, even just admitting those fears, bringing them out into the open can be a huge step in the right direction.
Absolutely. And it's also important for the individual to take responsibility for their own recovery. It's not something that someone else can do for them. They have to be willing to put in the work.
Right. It's about taking ownership of the issue and being proactive about seeking out the support and resources that you need to make a change.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of acknowledging the problem, exploring the impact, clarifying values and goals, facing fears, taking responsibility. Now let's talk about some concrete action steps that individuals can take to start making changes.
So one of the first things I would recommend is seeking professional help.
Yeah.
A therapist who specializes in pornography addiction can really help you understand the underlying issues that might be contributing to your use. And they can provide you with tools and strategies to start making changes.
Absolutely. And therapy is not just for the individual who's using pornography. It can also be really helpful for couples to go to therapy together.
Oh, absolutely. Couples therapy can be a great way to address the relationship issues that have been caused by pornography use. And it can provide a safe space for couples to start rebuilding trust and communication.
And then in addition to therapy, there are a lot of other things that individuals can do to create a more supportive environment for recovery.
Yeah, like creating a pornography-free environment.
Huh.
So that might involve things like getting rid of any pornographic materials that you have in your home, putting filters on your internet devices, or even limiting your access to the internet altogether.
Right. And it might also involve things like placing your computer in a common area of the house where it's more visible and less private, or making a commitment to only use the internet for work or school-related activities.
And then I think another really important step is to develop an action plan for what you're going to do instead of using pornography. So that might involve things like finding new hobbies, spending more time with friends and family, or getting involved in activities that you enjoy.
It's all about filling that void, right?
Exactly. And it's about replacing unhealthy behaviors with healthy ones.
And it's important to remember that this is a process. It's not going to happen overnight. There are going to be setbacks along the way.
Absolutely. And it's okay to make mistakes. The important thing is to learn from them and keep moving forward.
So we've talked a lot about the individual's journey, but I want to make sure we address the partners in this as well. Because, as we've discussed, pornography use can have a really significant impact on the partner. And it's not uncommon for partners to blame themselves for their partner's pornography use.
Yeah, I hear that a lot in therapy. Partners will say things like, if only I was more attractive, or if only I was better in bed, then my partner wouldn't be looking at pornography.
And it's so important to understand that that's not true. Your partner's pornography use is not your fault.
It's their choice,
Yeah.
and it's their responsibility to get help if they need it.
And it's really important for partners to seek out their own support.
Absolutely. There are a lot of support groups and resources available for partners of people who use pornography, and it can be incredibly helpful to connect with other people who understand what you're going through.
Right. And it's also important for partners to remember that they can't force their partner to change. The decision to stop using pornography has to come from the individual.
Yeah, the best thing you can do is to support your partner in their recovery. And that might involve things like setting boundaries, being patient, and offering encouragement.
And also taking care of yourself, right?
Absolutely. It's so important for partners to prioritize their own well-being. You can't pour from an empty cup.
Right. So we've talked about the individual's journey, the partner's experience, and the importance of support. But what about the relationship itself? Is it possible to heal the relationship after pornography has been an issue?
Yes, absolutely. It's not easy, but it is possible. And I think the key is for both partners to be willing to do the work.
And what does that work look like?
Well, it involves a lot of communication, a lot of honesty, and a lot of forgiveness. It's about rebuilding trust, reestablishing intimacy, and learning how to connect with each other in healthy ways.
And it often involves seeking professional help, right?
Yeah, couples therapy can be incredibly helpful in guiding couples through the process of healing. And there are also a lot of great books and resources available that offer guidance and support.
So I know we've covered a lot of ground today, but I hope that this deep dive has been helpful for you. And I want to leave you with a few resources that you might find useful.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're looking for a therapist who specializes in pornography addiction, you can check out the ASEC website. They have a directory of certified sex therapists.
And if your partner is someone who uses pornography, I highly recommend checking out CSA. They have support groups all over the world.
And for individuals who are struggling with pornography use, Sex Addicts Anonymous is a great resource. They have a 12-step program that's been really helpful for a lot of people.
And then finally, there's a great free ebook called The First Step, taking the first step toward recovery that you can download from LifeStar Therapy. It's a really good resource for both individuals and couples.
And I think it's important to remember that you don't have to go through this alone. There is help available, and there is hope for healing.
So as we wrap up today, I just want to leave you with a final thought. We've talked a lot about the impact of pornography on individuals and relationships, but I think it's also important to think about the broader societal implications of pornography.
Yeah, absolutely. Pornography is everywhere these days. It's easily accessible, and it's often portrayed as harmless fun. But I think it's important to have a critical conversation about the messages that pornography is sending and the potential consequences that it can have.
Right. And I think it's a conversation that we need to be having as individuals, as couples, and as a society. So I encourage you to continue exploring this topic, to talk to your loved ones about it, and to seek out resources if you need help.
And to really think about the kind of world that we want to live in, a world where relationships are healthy and fulfilling, and where sexuality is celebrated in a way that is respectful and empowering for everyone involved.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive today, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.